Hello, I'm Suzanne.
And I'm Zoe.
And Zoe is back, and you're listening to Sex Advice for Seniors. We're still sponsored by Sunset Satisfaction, just in case any of you are interested in buying pleasure objects for your loved one or yourself. Butt plugs, books, all sorts of stuff we sell. And you can go there and check it out. Zoe and I thought today, in light of some of the recent news reports about a certain well-known personality, that we might talk about the issue of consent. Zoe, you said you had some thoughts about consent.
Yeah. It's interesting. We were just chatting before we hit record a little bit about consent and about how it seems in some senses like just a no-brainer, Like, do you want to do this? No. Okay, we won't do it. Do you want to do this? Yes. Okay, here we go. But it can get really complicated, especially when alcohol or some form of intoxication is involved. So Planned Parenthood has a really simple model of consent that I think is pretty good. There are a couple different ways to look at consent that I usually talk about. So Planned Parenthood, the what is it called when you have it's fries? Acronym. The acronym is FRIES, like French fries. FRIES. Freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. So freely given, right? Consenting is a choice you make without pressure, manipulation, or under the influence of drugs or alcohol, right? You're not, if you are intoxicated, you're not, to a point, to a certain point, you're not able to freely give consent because you don't have all your faculties. Reversible, right? I usually say revocable, but reversible. Anyone can change their mind about what they feel like doing anytime. If you've done it before, and even if you're both naked in bed, right? You can be in the middle of the act, and if you say you've said yes, I want to have intercourse with you, then you're in the middle of the act. I'm changing my mind. This is no longer what I want to do. You need to stop doing it, right?
Yeah.
Informed. You can only consent to something if you have the full story. For example, if someone says they'll use a condom and they don't, there isn't full consent. If someone says they're on birth control, if they have a womb, they're on birth control, but they're not really, and often this is, if you have a sexually transmitted disease and you don't disclose that, right, you're not giving consent.
Yeah.
Enthusiastic. When it comes to sex, you should only do stuff you want to do, not things that you feel you're expected to do. And specific. Saying yes to one thing, like going to the bedroom to make out, doesn't mean that you've said yes to others, like having sex, intercourse. So that's the Planned Parenthood version. There's something else that people talk a lot about, which is called active consent, right? Affirmative, honest, conscious, voluntary, sober, and ongoing. Basically covers the same things. Just in a little bit of a different model. Active consent is not silence, a lack of protest, a lack of resistance, or assumed to exist based on past or current sexual dating or marital relationship, right? Yeah. In other words, you're married, your spouse can actually rape you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that does go on in relationships.
Yes.
I suspect, a lot of people that I know when I've spoken to some women of my age and talked about their early sexual history, it was almost always under the influence of something.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I know that even the very act of having sex, when you're not drunk, when you haven't had a drink, when you're not drunk, when you haven't taken drugs and everything, some people find that really, really, actually really challenging. Like, really hard, like getting to that deep level of intimacy without the aid of any substance can be really difficult for a lot of people. I know that. And I And that's why the consent thing sometimes can be a bit gray, I think, because as much as it all makes perfect sense, the reality is there's a lot of people that have probably never had sex sober.
Many,
Like
many, many.
like loads, right? I don't know what the
Yeah.
stats are, but I suspect they're significant. And
Yeah.
then where does all that stuff sit? If you're not fully present, if you are, I say, well, then it's not consensual. But of course, if you wake up in the morning and it's all happy families, then that's good. If you wake up in the morning and it's not all happy families, then that's bad. And I know that a friend of mine today, we were chatting about his kids, and he was saying that the the whole thing that's happening between the genders and a lot of blame that's being placed on males for not stepping up in the way that women think they should is making it really hard sometimes for guys to know what are these new rules that we've got. And I get that. I get the fact that not everybody wants to be in a relationship with somebody, especially in the early days where I think it's sexy to go, "Can I kiss you?" And then I'm like, "Yeah, that's hot, right?" And you could play around with all of that. Can I do this now? Can I do that now? Right? And that's I think that can be really fun. But a guy wrote on TikTok and said, one woman said, "I hate it when guys are constantly asking me if it's okay. I just want them to be a bit more spontaneous." So
I, it's interesting because I am somebody who this is where my personal preferences and my professional perspective clash sometimes. I'm someone who, in my personal life, when I engage in sexual activity with someone else, I really don't like for them to ask permission. It's a turnoff for me. It is and it isn't. There's an artful way of garnering consent and checking in with me, and I really love that and I respect that. But there's
yeah,
an aspect of me wanting, as a dyed-in-the-wool submissive, I want
yeah,
to be taken, right?
yeah,
And so, how do you balance consent with being taken? In my case, at my age, with the loads of experience that I've had, I
yeah,
try to do a lot of that talking and determining upfront in advance so
yeah,
that when we get to the actual act, the consent is sort of given up front. And then there are ways of checking in, along the way.
yeah,
Um, but it is true, and I just said it. I'm coming. I've been away in the desert in Southern California in Joshua Tree all weekend for days, teaching at a big yoga and music festival called Bhakti Fest. Really beautiful event if you are so inclined. I think there might be one in May coming up. We'll see. We're just back after the pandemic, but I've been doing this for 10 years, or more actually. And I was just saying to in a workshop that I was teaching on energetic intimacy, we were talking about consent and how it can be so, men are in a tough spot right now.
yeah,
And I recognize that. I'm sensitive to that. And the idea that we are connecting, he was very moved that his partner, who he didn't know, I have them partner with people that they don't know to do some eye gazing and things,
yeah,
and he felt very moved that this woman trusted him,
yeah,
that found him trustworthy or believed that she could just relax into this exercise with him,
yeah,
um, and how on eggshells he feels as a a human being in a body with a penis. um, so I think there's a the question of alcohol is challenging, and I think that one of the things, without victim shaming at all, I think that you have to, if you're going to drink and you're going to engage in drunk sex, there's a certain level of consent that you need to garner from yourself,
yeah,
and take responsibility for the level to which you're disabling your you know cognitive faculties.
Yeah, yeah. But, on the flip side, I think that, you were talking about kind of, domination, submission, BDSM, all that kind of thing. My experience also of that is that you set the clear rules at the beginning, you discuss the safe words, you discuss what you're comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with. I've done this with people where they have checked in and it's not intrusive, and I find it really respectful. But I also know that there's a huge part of that community who have watched too much porn. They've indulged in too much, stuff where there's no consent. They read 50 Shades of Grey or whatever the fuck they read. And, they think that's appropriate behavior. And I think for me, the reason why I've tended, when I've been involved in those dynamics, I've always really enjoyed it with somebody who's quite experienced and spent a considerable period of time in that, is because I have been in that scenario where a guy came over, we sort of discussed what we liked, it was all very playful, and then he came over and went into that kind of like, cliche dommy role. And he literally was on top of me, and he was a big, tall guy. He was like 6'6". He wasn't, and I'm, 5'4", 5'5". And I just said, get off of me. Get off of me. And he said, what? And I said, I'm not enjoying this. I'm not into this. I think it's best that you leave. And he was like, what? And I said, I'm not good with this. I thought I was good with it, but I'm not good with it. And for me, that took, because I'm experienced, I was able to do that. But I have to say that the me that was 20 years younger than that,
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have been. I probably would have just let him carry on with his thing and do his thing, and then just felt like shit afterwards. And why didn't I say anything and all that kind of stuff? Because speaking up takes courage.
Well,
These women, a lot of women that are in these scenarios with men who have got them pinned against the wall, underneath their body, pinning them down, whatever. It may all start very playful and everything, and then it becomes not so playful. And often they feel they have no agency, and they just feel trapped, literally trapped, right? And
yes.
and I get the fact that consent is something you need to practice. It's not something that just happens. You have to
Yes.
practice it all the time, like starting by just being comfortable with saying no, full stop, right?
Yeah.
No.
Yep. Yes, yes. You bring up such a good point. And one of the things in thinking about talking about this topic today was that I wanted to talk about how to practice consent
Mm.
with yourself first, and then with a friend or a
Yeah.
partner in a non-sexual situation, or a partner, potential partner, or a long-standing partner. A couple things that I feel like I need to just sort of acknowledge. One is that in the experienced, knowledgeable kink community, nobody has consent sewn up like the kink community. So good. You have to, right? And
Yeah.
that's something that's built right into that sort of lifestyle.
Yeah.
And so what you're speaking to are people who sort of dabble, right?
Yeah, that's
When I
right.
was saying that I'm a dyed-in-the-wool submissive, yes, when I play in the sort of kink realm, which is less and less frequently as I reach my, hover around 60 years old, I feel like I'm much less, I
Yeah.
have a much less capacity personally for that kind of intensity. But even just in regular non-kinky sex, I like to be dominated,
Yeah.
and so, and I think many people do, men and women. So there are subtleties and degrees, and I just wanted to give the kink community a little bit of credit in the way that that is communicated. Safe words are great. Safe words are great for anybody, any couple, whether you're kinky or not. Having
I
a term, if I were to say, you know, um, propaganda. It means that I want you to slow down, or have, or be less intense, or more gentle, or stop completely. Sometimes it's easier to just say a word than to have to find the words in the moment, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think also the thing about those safe words is that, again, you can play around with them, you can have fun with them, and you can do everyday things to just embed them within your relationships, right? So even as I talk about my tea consent, do you want a cup of tea? Yes. Do you want a cup of tea? No. Do you want a cup of tea? Maybe. We use this whole there's a whole animation about called tea consent, equating consent with a cup of tea. And it was like, if somebody doesn't want a cup of tea, you don't ram it down their throat. If somebody says they want a cup of tea and then they don't want to drink it because they just change their mind, you don't ram it down their throat. And again, just it some I'm not very good just generally saying no, just generally. And somebody told me, start with a counselor, a coach actually, and I put it in my post-it note. She said, if you find no difficult, start with, let me think about it. Because often it's not that I may want to do something, but I'm not quite sure. It needs to settle in my brain. I need to process it. Like, yeah, is this really what I want to do? So she's like, just let me think about it as your like word that gives you the space to be free to make your decisions. I was like, that's a good idea. Because often I just say yes, yes, yes. And then afterwards I think, why did I say yes to that? That wasn't even fun,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think too, there's an aspect of like look, I'm going to make it really simple. It's so much better to err on the side of caution and ask
yeah,
permission, or communicate, or check in. And if it ruins the mood, better that than ruining the mood by assaulting someone
yeah, for sure.
unintentionally, you know?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if
yeah.
you're just an asshole and go around assaulting people, cut that shit out. But
Yeah,
if you're concerned, I mean, if you're just two decent human beings trying not to hurt each other, better to talk about it. And to be able, I'd rather be told, that you asking permission kind of ruins the mood. It doesn't do it for me. Then I would say, right? I would say, okay, I get that, but how will I know if I'm doing something that you're uncomfortable with? So let's talk about how to communicate with each other while we're in the act and all fired up, you know? Just talk
yeah,
about it.
yeah,
Agree up front, we're gonna experiment here. So how do we, you can use, red, green, yellow.
yeah.
You could say, I often, you could say something like, I mean, if you don't want to, just stop the action and say, okay, now I want to debrief for a moment and see what's going on with you. Right? You can say like, how does, do you like this? Does this feel good? And that, people say that all the time. Baby, is this good? You liking
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
But you can actually honestly say, like, out of curiosity, is this good for you?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
where are you on your level? This is a kink thing, right? When you're
yeah.
playing with that edge of intensity and what people can, often
Tolerate.
call pain.
Yeah,
So you can say, like, where are you? What number on 1 to 10? 10 being like the most intense or painful or whatever, and 1 being nothing.
yeah,
You can say, like, where are you? I'm on a 4. And where do you want to be?
yeah,
I'd like a 7, or I'd like a 2. Well, yeah, okay, that's a lot of information
yeah,
for
yeah,
someone
yeah,
to play with. So there are ways of communicating.
yeah. I mean, outside of the kink community, I think the bigger challenge sometimes is you're on a vanilla first date. It seems to be going well. it's, you're the conversation's flowing, it's all feeling really good. Maybe one of you is feeling like, yeah, this is really happening, and the other one is maybe not feeling so good, or just not feeling it, or whatever. Often I think I've I've certainly been in situations where I've acquiesced to what I knew was somebody else, because I thought, let's just see where this goes. And then it hasn't been all that satisfying. And then I didn't really want to see them again. And then, they're calling me up all the time and stalking me and telling me everything was so wonderful. So, you do have to be able to be clear in about what it is that you actually want at that moment. And that's where sometimes drinks and drugs and everything blurs all of that decision making, and you end up in a crappy place where you wake up and think, what the hell did I just do there? And I know in one circumstance with one of my kids' friends, he woke up with a girl. She said, did we have sex? He said, yes, we did. Are you kidding me? She said, I don't remember it. And she went to the police, and he was charged with rape, and he was pulled out of university, and his life was destroyed from that moment on. But
Oh,
that's to me like the most extreme scenario, right? But it also shows me like you have to be careful about this kind of stuff. Like in the recent news reports, these women, some of them waited years for fear of, the fact that, and this, he's not the only one. There's loads of people that are celebrities that have gotten away with all sorts of shit, right? And people just feel like, I don't have any voice.
yeah.
Nobody's going to listen to me. He's got a big law firm behind him.
Yes.
It's just
Yes.
not, I don't have any voice. So, you really do have to think, even from a young age. And I suspect that consent is not taught in schools as much as it needs to be. We talk about
No,
human
it's not.
biology, and this part goes into this part, and all of this, but we don't talk about, boys not having a right to ask for naked photos and spread them amongst their friends, um, all this kind of stuff that we know goes on with children these days.
Yeah.
Because nobody tells them any of this stuff, right?
No. Correct. No one tells you. So we learn about biology. We learn about conception. We learn about, you know, sperm swimming to egg. It's all very abstract. No one's talking about relationship. No one's talking about, it's yeah. And it's my experience that the way consent is covered is like don't give consent. Don't do it, you know?
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, like just don't have sex.
Yeah.
Hold
Yeah. I
off.
suppose. Yeah. And maybe that, I don't know if that's the same in the UK, but I suspect in the US, it's just, if you just avoid it, you don't have any problems, right?
Right.
So just avoid it, and therefore ignore all the problems.
Right.
But we do need to teach young people about it, because as they grow up and they start watching stuff on social media, all the crap that is out there about, women, somebody's put on the TikTok channel, some women love this form of abuse. And I thought, the fact you've used abuse in this sentence, and the fact that, I mean, where does that assumption come from? I said, sure, there are women that may consent to you doing things that other people might really just find completely distasteful.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that there's a huge group of women out there who are dying to, have like deep throat blowjobs and shit, right?
Yeah. I'm gonna and I don't have a statistic on this. But so it's all sort of anecdotal evidence from my own practice with women, and I work with a lot of women for many years now. And it is I, I believe that it's every woman's sort of deepest, darkest fear that they will be raped.
Yeah.
That's the, I mean, other than killed, right? Fear of
Yeah,
death. But like there is being in a female body comes with a certain degree of vulnerability that we can be raped, and
yep,
many women are.
yep,
And so, I think that that's a reality and a sensitivity that I think is starting to surface in terms of like society, right? And the
yeah,
Me Too movement. And so there's a heightened awareness, and there's a heightened sensitivity. And as with all things that in the process of transformation, the pendulum is on one side, and then it swings all the way to the other side, and then
yeah,
I think that this is a little bit of a comeuppance, in terms of like the context we live in, where we have to really recognize that that this is not okay behavior, and that hundreds and thousands of people are being harmed. You know?
yeah. I mean, the conversation I had today with my male friend was around the fact that I said to him, all women live with fear. I don't think he was saying about the fact the pendulum had swung too far to the other side. And he just feels like men are just constantly under attack now. It's just, we're just constantly bombarding them with this isn't good enough. That's not good enough. This is shit. We're doing this. We're doing that. And I said, I think you need to appreciate we have been living with fear our whole lives. I'm 62. I'm still walking around with a set of keys in my hand at night,
Yeah.
right? Because that's what I was told to do, because I have been molested on the street. And so I take precautions, right? And my experience is very similar to many, many, many other women I know. And I think it's hard for people in a male body to fully understand the level of heightened awareness and fear we we constantly live with. And yes, I agree, like maybe we have swung too far. Maybe, sure, there are good guys out there, we know that, but you know we have to feel we can speak up. And that's really, for me, what it comes down to is like, do we feel we have the right to speak up without being shut down?
Yeah.
That's it, right? Like, if we can't speak up, there's no consent.
Yeah. Yes. So I think it's a good time to say, like, how do we practice consent with ourselves? How do we check in? How do we know? Right? I you know, I think using tea as an example, when you're alone, when you're not actually offering somebody else a cup of tea, when you offer yourself a cup of tea, just slow down and take a moment to say, do I really want this tea? I mean, I do. Look, I'm sort of
Yeah,
working
yeah,
on changing my habits around food. So I often will say, like, do I want this third
yeah,
taco, or were two tacos plenty for me? What does my body want? Like, my mouth and my brain want to eat the deliciousness, but actually I'm full. So, really, really just using food, using whatever you're doing, as an opportunity to check in with yourself, and really foster that relationship. When you are going out and you're going to be drinking, and whether you're with somebody that you're probably going to have sex with,
yeah,
or that opportunity may come up, or you're going out to a party and there's a chance that you'll meet somebody new, right?
yeah,
Make a decision for yourself up front. How much am I going to be willing to do this? I'm going to be drinking tonight, so you know what, categorically I'm not going home with anybody.
yeah,
Maybe I'll have a kiss, but that's it. And I'm setting that rule for myself, right? And
yeah,
just give yourself a framework to work within, so
yeah,
that you don't get yourself into, I mean, listen, we've all had that situation where we are sort of trying to navigate our own, we're drunk or high, and we can't sort of figure out what it is that we want. I
yeah,
want the taco, but maybe it's not the best time to have the taco,
yeah,
so to speak. and
yeah,
and so there's a little bit of taking personal responsibility, and also really knowing yourself and being deeply connected to yourself so that you can access what it is and where you are, and not just sort of like run away with some behavior that you may regret later. The other thing is that I just also want to acknowledge, I mean, I've been in a situation where I've had to like talk my way out of being raped,
Yeah.
with someone I knew.
Yeah.
Um, and it's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
No, I tried to talk myself out of that situation and I wasn't successful. So that also is terrifying. But I think it's also worth pointing out, just as we close, that this topic is not exclusively about women. These are, I know men that have felt that they've been pressured by women into having sex with them when they didn't want to, and really felt ashamed and terrible in the morning and said, I never should have done that. That was a mistake. What was I thinking? And, sometimes again, there was alcohol involved, or there were things being asked that they weren't comfortable with. And I know lots of, again, there are lots of women out there experimenting, trying out new things. And you have to find the person that is keen to do that with you consensually, because often in these scenarios you will find, I know I've been with partners where we've had that discussion and they're like, I don't want to do that.
yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
my thing and I'm not going to do that. So that's
Well,
it. Right.
and I
And
think what you're speaking to also is that, or sort of indirectly, is something that's called clinically, that's called non-concordance,
yeah,
where it's like a woman. I've heard men say this. Well, she was wet.
yeah,
Well, yeah, just because her body is responding doesn't mean that there's consent there. And for men, it's really, really difficult because sometimes they'll get an erection when they do. I mean, their body is responding to stimulation. It doesn't mean
yeah.
that's, they have a brain in their head, not in their
Yeah,
penis.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So it goes both ways. And I think the checking in with yourself is a really good tip in just practicing being able to say no in everyday situations, and then being able to say no in situations that might be a little more confrontational, uncomfortable, and then eventually getting to the point where you feel like you can say no and you can make a decision, a completely conscious decision with clarity and without feeling, oh, I'm going to let that person down.
Yeah.
They're going to
Yep.
hate me forever. And oh, I bet they're not going to like me anymore. It's like you just have to get over that and go, it doesn't matter. I'm being clear. I need to
Yeah.
be in a relationship where I can be clear with the other person. Full stop.
Yes. Yes.
Oh.
100%.
So there we go. Consent. Yes, no, maybe, perhaps.
Never
You have,
mind. I changed
you,
my mind.
I
Right.
changed my mind. You have a choice. Just remember that. You have a choice. This is Suzanne,
And this is Zoe.
and we're going to say goodbye now.
Bye bye.